Welcome. Let the roll reflect all council members are present and a quorum has been established. Tonight we have Executive Director of Dakota County Historical Society, Matt Carter, is with us. If Matt, would you like to come up? Welcome. Welcome, Maya.
All right, so thank you for the opportunity to come in and present again. It's been about 6 months since our last time we were here, and I am joined by Mariah Ring, our site supervisor at the LeDuc estate. So we'll do a quick presentation. If you have any questions on the information that was submitted, definitely feel free to reach out and let us know either through this meeting or via email or a phone call. So I'll let Mariah do a quick update.
Hello, thank you. So we already in the last 6 months have actually seen an increase in total people through the site, attendance, sorry, that was the word I was looking for. An increase in attendance, which is really great, and especially for the tour season. For example, May, we were up by almost 100 people going through the house, which was really exciting. June and July, we weren't quite as high in a differential, but it's still really nice to see more people coming through. We've also had more people coming on Thursdays, which was our slow day last year, so that's also really great. We've had a number of events going on at the house, both public events and private rentals, which has been great, and we already have some scheduling into the fall, and I even have one that I just cemented for next June already, which is pretty exciting too. I think our school tours were up too. We had 254 students tour through the site, which was really exciting. We also, as an organization, did different classroom visits and did presentations. For example, I did one for Miss Moan's class, which was really exciting and fun to do. They liked that a lot, and we did activities and things. So we're trying to bring some things to the students as well, especially if they can't quite get away from school to come to the site. I think that's all. We've been doing different advertising on Facebook and in the newspaper when we can get those in around Dakota County for the LeDuc, hopefully to expand our reach and get more people to see it and come to it. And then our staff has increased too. We hired 2 new educators specifically for the LeDuc this summer who will then train at Sibley next summer, and Sibley has 2 there that will train at the LeDuc. So we're expanding our educator reach as well.
And then as an organization for the Dakota County Historical Society, the last time I was here, we talked about a couple of upcoming projects that we had. So one of the biggest things we've done over the last, well, I guess 6 months or so is in May, we had our Memorial Day weekend event where we were at the Mall of America. And we took our World War I exhibit to the Northeast Court, which was the former Sears Court, had our exhibit set up there. And with that, we had our World War I exhibit, the trench, artifacts. We also did a fashion show in the Rotunda. So that was great publicity for our organization. The whole time we were able to publicize the LeDuc estate as well as all 3 of our sites. We had about 50,000 people just walking in that general vicinity, with about 5,000 actually coming in, going through the exhibit, talking with us. We had one guy that said he's never been to the mall. He was in his 70s or 80s, and the only reason he came was to come in and share his history with World War I and his family. With that, we had a media campaign that was put together between our organization and the Mall of America's PR team, and we had from Thursday before Memorial Day weekend to the Monday of, we had every major news station other than WCCO that we were on and publicizing this event in our organization. We had a media reach of about 677,000 people according to the numbers that the mall was able to pull, and that was the equivalent to $85,000 worth of advertising dollars. And then that was in addition to what they did to help publicize the fashion show that we did in the Rotunda. We also, at the last meeting we had, updated on a tour review that we were doing within our organization that would take place primarily at LeDuc and Sibley, because those are the 2 sites we have that offered paid tours. So we brought the public in, we listened to the different stakeholder groups that are associated with the sites. So here at LeDuc specifically, it was We talked with the Friends of LeDuc in Historic Hastings, as well as some of the volunteers and staff, to kind of get a sense of what they think the public is interested in. And then we also talked to the public through a private tour that we did, where we gave them the general tour, walked throughout the grounds, and then just got a sense of, okay, what did you like, what didn't you like, what do you wish you could see? And based off of that, we did a test of the LeDuc estate as well as the Sibley site based on all the feedback we got, where we put together a special exhibit at the Sibley site called the Four Sarahs exhibit, and then Mariah put together a plan which was included in that packet that you were provided, to look at redoing our tours and also updating exhibits at the site. So I'll let Mariah kind of talk about that real quick.
So I put together a project proposal that I actually gave to the board, and they approved it, so I'm going to walk you through a brief version of it now. Some of the things that people wish that we had were a little bit more of an exhibit space, and we do have an area where we could showcase that. So I proposed that the Simmons shed that we have on the grounds, right now it's set up as a one-room schoolhouse, but that we could turn that into a rotating exhibit space so that it's something different every season. So every year somebody has a reason to come back to the site. That's what we really want, is return visitation. Now the Simmons shed is a free area, so you can go and walk the grounds without paying for a tour. So we're looking at if there's a way that we can still get a little money for the site through it, maybe by having a donation box or something along those lines. But I do have a few, I planned out 5 years of proposed exhibits. So this year we kept the schoolhouse. Next year we would feature the Hastings Needlework Company. That was because it was a women's run cottage industry in the state of Minnesota, one of the first, and that would coincide with 100 years of national suffrage, so we would tie into that women's history sort of a theme for the year. In 2021, we'd do Civil War in the LeDuc because it's 160 years from the start of the Civil War. 2022, we'd do the history of the city of Hastings, since it's going to be the 165th anniversary of the city being surveyed and incorporated. And then in 2023, we would feature LeDuc as Commissioner of Agriculture for Rutherford B. Hayes, and that's because that'll be the 145th year anniversary of President Hayes' visit to the city of Hastings in the state of Minnesota. Then in the carriage barn, we currently have an exhibit about George Daniels, the former slave who then became a hired hand for William following the Civil War. And we'd like to actually expand that exhibit and tell more of his story to really incorporate that into a bigger scale. We also want to provide more informative placards around the barn too, so that we can create that as an educational space so that people can come into the carriage barn, they can see the tools laid out on the tool bench and know what they were used for. And we've even looked at potentially doing the other side of the carriage barn in an exhibit about Andrew Jackson Downing, who was the architect for the house. Just so that there's a little bit more of the information about the site that you don't necessarily get on the tour, or you might want more of. You can go somewhere to find it. The other thing that we're looking at doing is getting more signage for the grounds, so that the site itself, including the grounds, becomes something that's more interpretive, especially because we have people who come when the site isn't open for tours. So in this way, you could walk around and we were hoping to get a map of the grounds. So you can see there's a walking path through the woods. These are the gardens. This is what they were used for. Here's the orchard, etc. And also just different things like, this is a black walnut tree. This is something that William LeDuc introduced to the area, and so that you can get more of an interactive experience when you're just walking around versus just walking around and enjoying everything. You might get to take a little bit more away. So that's some of the things that we're looking at hopefully doing and incorporating into the site in the near future.
Thank you. Anything else, Matt?
No, any questions for either myself or Mariah?
Sure, Councilmember Vaughn.
Thank you. Madam Mariah, either one. You had mentioned a lot of data about giving tours. Do we consider a tour of the house or a tour of the grounds? The number of people that attend the LeDuc, example, Sunday night was very busy with the concert out there. Is that counted? Are you counting those numbers? And if so, can the house only hold so many tours before it starts to wear out?
So because it is a historic house, there is that sort of an aspect. Typically, the issue would be with the staircase, because it is a home, it's not necessarily a museum space. So there's always a lot of wear and tear that you have to worry about. So a lot of times museums or historic sites of our kind would try to look at the population that was going through and hope that that's not too much for the stairs. Now, a site of our size could handle about 10,000 people per year through and up those stairs without adding extra wear and tear on the house. When we count population size, we typically do paid tours, but I also have been counting all of the people who have attended the Orchard concerts that we've been having on Sundays. So we had 150 the first weekend, 75 last weekend, and 168 yesterday. And then those go into our count that is put on the sheet that we provided. So this also includes rentals and how many people they invite, how many people actually attend. I've tracked all of those numbers and they get put onto. Is that enough? Yeah, okay, perfect.
Yeah, and going off of that, one of the things that we don't track right now, because we still have to figure out how to do that, is just the number of people that are using the grounds, like as Mariah said, after hours. Trying to figure out how many people are walking around. A lot of times we can pull up for a meeting or whatever, or Mariah's showing up for work, and there's people sitting out on the benches throughout the grounds just as is, but they don't necessarily come to an event. So those numbers aren't really being counted right now. Some people say you can put trail cams up, but then you have to sit and watch, hours of trail cam footage to try and count the people or put a trail counter. But if they don't walk between the 2 points that counts it, so that's one of the things we're trying to figure out, is how can we accurately count those people that are using the site outside of our normal operating hours. So to answer your question, like Mariah said, yes, we are counting those, but then there's those ones that don't come into an event or our physical site that we're still trying to figure out how can we accurately count those.
Yep. Thank you. Councilmember Bosanic?
Thank you, Your Honor. You might consider something like a guest book outside. I know a lot of state and national parks that I've been in, they've got something there where you can, put your name, address, so forth down. Obviously, you gotta build a shelter and everything. You don't wanna leave a laptop out there, but maybe something like that, especially. Somebody local might not do it, but if they're from out of town, I would think that they would, yeah. But fascinating. I'm just so pleased to see such a jewel here in Hastings, and thank you very much for everything that you're doing.
Yeah, and we want to thank the city council and the city of Hastings as well for the support that you've shown us over the last, since 2005 really, when we started the agreement to operate the site together, so.
Great. Councilmember Fulch?
Thank you, Your Honor. I just was looking at the budget, and so I'm just trying to interpret it as I'm reviewing it, and so I just want to understand. So it looks like the overall net balance is $28,000 negative, and so how is that deficit being covered then?
Yep. So that number that you saw is what we're projecting in the total budget for the year. So if you look at that, the far right column, that's the total budget, and then the year to date is the middle column there. So that anything that goes above and beyond what the site brings in is covered through the DCHS general operating funds. So if the site comes up and is 40 or 50,000, which it had been in the past, that comes out of the DCHS general fund and covers that. So while the site will show it, the final total balance of the DCHS general ledger shows a zero in that line item.
And do you have a goal for actually being revenue positive then? I was very appreciative to hear of the efforts that you're making, Mariah, to upgrade of the LeDuc. I know that efforts were made to go through a strategic planning process, and I'm super excited to hear that you are getting that kind of public input. That's really important. I'm hoping, what I love about the LeDuc is that the volunteer base there is very passionate about the site, and not only are they passionate about the site, they're passionate about the staff there. And there's a lot of camaraderie, as a family, and so I think that there's a lot of positives. But I have been interested in seeing, that the LeDuc is actually a positive revenue generator. This doesn't include all of the expenses that the city puts in, like for instance, we just renovated the roof and things of that nature that the, city has invested in. And so it would be interesting to see the total cost.
Yeah, and to go off of what you were saying too, is the volunteers at the site, organization-wide, without all the volunteers we have, we wouldn't be able to operate because we'd have to pay staff to do that. Just last year, at the end of 2018, we had over 6,000 hours donated from volunteers across our organization. And that came out to over $100,000 worth of donated time that we were able to utilize outside of having to pay our staff to do it. So, yeah, like you said, the volunteers are a huge part of that site. And that number at the end is actually, if you look back over the last couple of years, it's a smaller number, so it's going down. It's just not going down very fast. I want to say last year, the year before, it was between 40 and 50,000. So now, again, it's down to 28, but we still have a ways to go to bring that to a zero in the line item, if not come out with a profit. So organizationally, we're projecting to come out with a profit this year, but again, that's organizationally. So site-wise, we still have a ways to go with that. And we think with the new exhibits, and again, as Mariah said, we're looking to find a way, I don't want to say to monetize it, but a way for these new exhibits we're putting in, even if it's for them to see those, and then, as we develop a new tour for the site, is if we can build a tour around that exhibit. So that was one of the things we did at Sibley's site, is we put in the Four Sarahs exhibit, which looked at the four Sarahs that were in Henry Sibley's life, his wife, daughter, mother, and I'm missing one. His sister, yes. So we put a special exhibit in, and then we offered on the every Saturday, the very first tour, we did a special tour before the site even opened that was just about that exhibit. That's something that we can, again, try to do here, and that's a way with that new exhibit and the new features we're putting in, hopefully be able to get new generated income from that.
Well, thank you for that. And I would add, I've always wanted to see a tour there about the real ghost stories at the LeDuc, because when you talk to the staff and they tell you things, that kind of puts goosebumps on your arms and makes your hair raise. And so, so anyhow, that was my 2 cents. And so welcome, Mariah. It sounds like you're doing a terrific job, and I'm glad to have you within our ward. So thanks.
And if you want to hear those ghost stories, come to the candlelit tours. And actually, we put them out on the website Saturday or Sunday, and we already have people registering. So they'll sell out fast. So
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
thank you.
All right. Thank you both for the update, and keep up the good work. Oh, do you have something else, Maria? Go ahead.
I just haven't mentioned Civil War Weekend yet.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So, no, that's okay. So Civil War Weekend is going to be this year on the 7th and 8th of September. We do have reenactors coming, and the theme this year is Women in the Civil War. And that's to tie in with the 100-year anniversary of suffrage in Minnesota, and then also national suffrage last year. So we're trying to do a women's history theme organization-wide. So we're doing Women in the Civil War. The 3rd Minnesota group, they have a women's portion of that, who actually is going to do an old-fashioned doll raffle, which is what they did to raise money during the Civil War. We have somebody who's going to represent the United States Sanitary Commission, which was also an organization run by women. And then we'll have different presentations that will be themed around that as well. We're also hoping to once again have food trucks present. I've been communicating with a few of those to hopefully bring some more people in. And then the regular attractions will also be there too.
Sure. Great.
Thank you.
That it? Thank you. All right. Next, we have a presentation from Zach Bloomstrand on his Eagle Scout project. Welcome, Chief Shute.
Good evening, Madam
And
Mayor,
Zach.
members of City Council. I'd like to introduce Zachery Bloomstrand. Zachery is the son of Steve and Brenda Bloomstrand. In spring of this year, Zachery reached out to me about his interest in performing an Eagle Scout project through the Boy Scouts of America. Zachery was aware of an antique firefighting hose cart that we had at the fire station that was in need of a complete restoration. Literally, the spokes were rotting off the big wooden wheels on it. Through the support of the City Council and the generous donations from the family and friends of the late Tom Furlong Sr., the project began. Zachery began his project by researching the hose cart. He found out that it was manufactured between 1895 and 1899 by Watrous Manufacturing in St. Paul, Minnesota. It was first purchased by the state of Minnesota and placed into service at what was then the Minnesota State Hospital, which is now the Minnesota Veterans Home. Somewhere in the early 1900s, the ownership was transferred to the city of Hastings. While Watrous maintains records on all of their equipment that they have sold, they had a massive fire at their plant in 1905 and lost all their records pertaining to this particular hose cart. In Zachery's research, he also located a company near Mitchell, South Dakota, who specializes in repairing old wooden wagon wheels. With the assistance of his father and grandfather, they made several trips to South Dakota to have the wooden spoke wheels reworked. He also sandblasted all the metal parts and painted them back to the original color that they were. Once all the components were refurbished, Zachery reassembled the hose cart to its original condition. And you saw it tonight out in front of City Hall as it's on display. It turned out very, very nice, and we're very proud. So on behalf of the Hastings firefighters, we'd like to thank Zachery Bloomstrand for his diligent work and congratulate him on completing a very successful Eagle Scout project. We're very proud of Zachery and his accomplishments. With that, we've got a plaque from the Hastings firefighters presented to Zachery Bloomstrand for his Eagle Scout project in recognition and thanks for your time and excellent work in refurbishing the antique hose cart. On behalf of the Hastings firefighters, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my friends and family for helping me with this project, especially my grandpa and my dad, who had special skills in welding and woodwork that really helped me with this project. I'd like to thank the fire station and Mike Shute for allowing me to do this project, and I feel really honored to be able to do this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Zachery. Do you have any idea how many hours you put into it?
I think it was around 200.
Great. It is beautiful. Thank you. Council, any other comments? All right, one more round of applause. Nice job. Let's see. Are there any corrections to the minutes from the August 5th meeting? No? With none, they are approved. Comments from the audience. Anyone willing to or wishing to comment in the audience for anything other that is on the agenda or in the consent agenda? No comments? Okay. Council, there are any council items to be considered? Okay. Consent agenda. Council, I will accept a motion to approve the consent agenda. Councilmember Brox and Councilmember Leifeld. All those in favor? Oh, aye. Yes, excuse me.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a question. I noticed we have a number of donations that have been made to the city, Parks Department, the city itself, Fire Department, Reserve, Police, and so forth. It's always been my wish that we could highlight those things. I'm not going to go through them because there are quite a few of them tonight. But do we, ask our city administrator, Julie, do we send acknowledging thank you letters to the people who have made the donations or the groups that have made the donations?
After each council meeting, the mayor sends a note to each donating individual.
Good. Very good. Thank you so much.
Okay, now, all those in favor of accepting the consent agenda? Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Okay. Tonight, we have discussion on the Confluence development. John, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council members. I'm going to pull up the presentation here in just a moment. The action before us tonight. And maybe a little longer than hoped. There we go. So tonight, Mayor and Council, we have before us the third amendment to the purchase and development agreement for the Confluence, the redevelopment of the Hudson facility. What I'd like to do tonight is to go through a little background information. I know that you're very familiar with the project, but I want to set the context of the request tonight against some of the other actions that have taken place within the project itself. So what we're looking at specifically tonight is the authorization of a third amendment to the purchase and development agreement. And this is an agreement between the city, Hedra, and Confluence. The original agreement was signed in 2016. It was for the transfer of the building itself from the city and Hedra to Confluence and certain conditions that were involved with that. Certain obligations that Confluence had, certain obligations that we had. And this was for the development of what's termed now the Confluence, formerly Great River Landing. This is the historic rehabilitation of the existing 100,000 square foot building into hotel, apartments, banquet facility, restaurant, and retail space. So those activities going on within the agreement itself. A little bit of history on the project itself. I did fit it onto one page, which I was happy to see. 2010, we purchased the building itself for $3 million. We purchased the building as a redevelopment site. We took a look at the situation going on with the New Hastings Bridge and our long-term desire to remove commercial or industrial property from the riverfront to create a more inviting environment. So we were able to purchase that for $3 million in 2010. At that time, we weren't sure if it was going to be a development site or a rehabilitation project of the existing building. We went through a redevelopment study shortly after that, made some determinations, asked the community. It was clear at that time that what was desired was to keep the building and to rehabilitate the building. Knowing that it was going to be something that would be a more costly endeavor and a more time-consuming endeavor to do it. But taking a look at the historic context of that building, its position on the riverfront, and the desire to keep that, to showcase the history of Hastings were important issues in making that determination. So we had some work ahead of us. We had to go through environmental assessments during 2012 and 13, market assessments as well, finding grant funds, cleaning stuff up. We met with different development firms starting in 2013 on concepts for rehabilitation of the project. We selected Confluence Development in 2014 and have been working with them since that time. During that time, they have also purchased the old First National Bank building across the street. That's been demolished and a new parking ramp is in its place today. We also executed a purchase and development agreement with them on the terms of transfer for the building itself, went through soil removal and demolition, and ultimately transferred the property to Confluence in early 2018. So since 2018, there's been a delay in the actions that we anticipated to see on the property. When Confluence prepared building plans and specifications for construction of the project, they realized the cost of rehabilitation became significantly more expensive than they anticipated. So when they put those detailed plans and specs together, started costing things out, it was significantly more expensive than what they could finance at that time. At that time, I believe it would have been very easy for Confluence to have walked away and said, this is something that we cannot do. This is more involved and more costly than we had anticipated. And they would have been able to do that under the terms of the agreement. They did not. They kept with the project. They spent more time and more capital on making sure that the plans were to a point that they could be financed and they could be constructed. That in turn led to a delay in the project, a delay that we as a city have had cost as well on that. I'll detail some of that, but a cost nonetheless. In May of this year, we met with Hedra and the council to discuss the project and the delays. At that time, they were completing their value engineering of the project and ready to really start moving forward on items. They have completed the building plans, and they have been submitted to the city. They are about ready to be issued by our city building department for construction of the project. Since May, we have met weekly with the Confluence group to look at the time frame and to make sure that we are on track with the different things that we need to do. As you are aware, we are under a time burden right now as to when we need to expend the grants before they expire at the end of the year. And that's something that we're keeping in mind, and something as we move forward through the project, we want to be able to ensure that we are confident that these can be expended and things can be completed. So what are some of the implications of the project so far, of the delay of the project? One has been an incomplete building, meaning higher TIF bond payments. Under the existing agreement right now, significant construction was to be achieved by the end of this year. That certainly is not going to happen. Because of that, the TIF bond payment we would have is going to be the full payment come next year, where we had anticipated that the valuation of the project would have lowered that payment. So that is an implication of the delay. Another risk that I'd mentioned is the loss of grant funds potentially. These need to be expended by the end of 2019. What I'm documenting here is about $1.6 million in grant funds for various activities. Of that, the bottom two, about $600,000 worth of environmental grants, are things that we are responsible for within the purchase and development agreement. These are things that if the grant funds cannot be utilized, we are on the hook to be able to pay for those expenses. Now, there's some caveats to that I'll get into in a moment as well. We've also had increased environmental cleanup costs for the property itself. We had an original contract with Clean Vapor, our vapor intrusion mitigation system installer, that because of a 1.5 year delay, increased the cost about 6%, of about $21,000 total. We have costs involved in the project that continue on. Now, about 1.5 years ago, Council and Hedra met to go over amendments to the agreement, and we reviewed some of the additional costs that we would have at that time. Those costs continue to go forward with vapor intrusion mitigation system and wood sealing. I'll kind of stop here with a little explanation of what these things are. With vapor intrusion mitigation, this is a system that actively vents soil vapor from the ground of the building through an HVA system, venting it out through the roof of the building itself. This is something that makes the most sense to be constructed in conjunction with other HVAC and building activity within the structure itself. For the city to do this independently of that would be more costly and ultimately result in a system that would likely have to be modified upon the Confluences getting into the building and doing their construction. On the wood sealing end of it, there was contamination within the building itself that leached into the floor and into the trusses. There is an encapsulant paint that's essentially applied to these areas so that there's no environmental consequences leaching through of contaminants within those areas, as well as some installation of some gypcrete flooring, lightweight concrete to cover some of that flooring, essentially to encapsulate the environmental conditions in place there so they do not become an issue. With those, we do have existing grant funds of about $578,000. However, there are funds that we as a city, primarily Hedra, would need to pay, and that's total about $386,000. That 386 figure is consistent with the figure that we saw 1.5 years ago. It has increased $21,000 due to the VIM's additional cost. So what are we looking at tonight? We're looking at an amendment that does a few things for us. One, it creates more specific timing requirements for the developer to complete the work on the project. When we met in May, we were very concerned about ensuring that the project would move forward on a timely basis so that we could fully expend the grant funds on the property. In many meetings with Confluence, along with their contractors and our environmental contractors, our environmental engineers, we have come up with a schedule in which we believe everyone can do the parts that they need to do in a timely fashion so that we are able to expend the grant funds before the end of the year on this. There are certain provisions within the agreement itself in which Confluence is to perform what we call pre-work or preparatory work preceding our environmental work. So they basically need to get the building to a certain condition so we can do our VIMS installation. They need to get the building to a certain condition so that we could do our wood ceiling work. And there's dates related to those within the agreement itself. If they can't meet the requirements to provide that pre-work by those dates, then there's some relief of environmental cost obligations that we have. So that's a big item in there. We spent a lot of time negotiating and determining what that will be. There's also the proof of financing before the project proceeds itself. We've tied a notice of proceed to the issuance of a building permit. With that, we have a right of reverter on the property right now in which we have the ability to take the property back. Once construction starts, that ability to enact the reverter disappears. And so we wanted to ensure that the project is indeed set to go and it can proceed in a timely fashion before we issue that building permit. So we have the financing in place. So that's something as part of the agreement as well. Additional project reporting requirements, better defined process for grant payments so that we can process those in a more timely fashion. Ability to start the park and trail project ASAP. And by ASAP, I mean tomorrow morning. They're looking to start out there 7 a.m. tomorrow morning doing stuff within the park. And then short notice of default provisions as well. So in order to enact a notice of default, it was 30 days previous. It is 7 days today. What we hope to do with this is to provide a reasonable time frame for performance. We've gone through a lot of work in the last 6 months or so to answer the specific questions of how this project can get done in a timely fashion. And we're confident that we're at that point. Like I said, the project is set to go. The parking ramp's been completed, as you all know. Trail project begins tomorrow morning. We have the complete building plans. Interior work would begin no later than September 16th, which is about 3+ weeks from today. They'll start within the building. We have that detailed project scheduled to allow the city to expend grant funds prior to expiration. So I'm looking at the project achievements here. When you look back at this project, what will it achieve? Did it meet the expectations of what we set out to do, some 10+ years ago? When we acquired this project here, we wanted to develop a city landmark to further bring people to the riverfront. We saw the new bridge being constructed. We wanted to be able to solve that problem that we've always had is how do you get people off of Highway 61 to experience our downtown area? And thought that this site and having an attribute there would help to do that. And with the project that we have going forward today, I believe that we meet that. It's also a renovation and reuse of a historic downtown building. We're historic Hastings. When we went through the review of that project early on, we made a clear determination that we wanted to reuse that building. It's been difficult, time-consuming, expensive, and frustrating for all involved in this one. But at the end of the day, I believe it's something that we'll look back on and go, how could we have not done this? Similar to the building we're in right now. There's further extension and activation of the downtown riverfront. This is just going to increase all the great things that we have right now. The one thing, too, it's interesting is this is going to provide an opportunity for greater investment within downtown and Vermilion Street. When you have this massive development here, it is going to have ripple effects. Those ripple effects can happen with other redevelopment within the downtown and onto Vermilion Street as well. This will be a positive thing. Also, it culminates the successful use of about $5 million in grant fundings. We've had a number of investment partners that have given their funding for the project for environmental, parking ramp, and a wide variety of items. And so this would be the culmination of that. And so at this point, again, we are looking for action tonight to authorize signature of the amendment to the purchase and development agreement. We have representatives from Confluence Development here as well if you have any questions for them, and I could stand for any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Council, any discussion? Councilmember Fulch?
Thank you, Your Honor. John, thank you for an excellent presentation. I'm really excited to hear that you've been working so closely with the Confluence development team. They've been wonderful, to work with thus far, and they have been trying really hard to be, informative and transparent with the council, and so we appreciate the partnership, and thank you for all your due diligence. It's not easy coming up with techniques to manage a contract like this. And so I just want to give you kudos for doing your best to put in place some structure to keep things on track. So thank you.
Welcome, thank you.
Councilmember Balsonic?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm reading here from your letter to the council, where you're giving us the action requested background and so forth. At the bottom of page 1, it says that delays in this project have created additional financial risks for the city. You mentioned that the grants received for environmental remediation have to be expended by the end of this year, or the city will be obligated to pay for those. And I know you've established strict timelines, as you're stating here in your memo to us. Now, we have lost $225,000 or so dollars in TIF tax money because the project is not going to be done this year, right?
Correct.
Okay. And I wanted to let the public again know about that. We talked about that a couple of meetings ago, but $250,000. I even have a hard time saying that, I guess. I don't say those kinds of figures all that often. You had said that there has been a great expense for this project, but I think I would like to have you qualify that a little bit more so that we know, again, the public knows about the grants, public knows about the time spent by city staff to do all of these things. So elaborate a little bit more on, the great expense that you referred to here a few minutes ago.
Sure. With any redevelopment project, the reason why an entity such as the city and Hedger is involved in redevelopment is because the private market will not be involved in it but for the city's help. You take a look at the project there at Hudson. You've got a vacant 100,000 square foot polluted factory building on the river. It requires a lot of involvement by an entity to get it to a point where a private market person could be able to develop that property. We need to expend money to do that and time to prepare that together. As far as the funds that have gone into that building itself, I mentioned we had a purchase price of $3 million originally on that. We've had carrying costs over the years for maintenance during the time period that we held the building. There's been staff time that's gone into it as well, consultant time that's gone into it. The staff time that's gone into the building really would be time that we would devote to development projects, whether it would be this project or someplace else on it. That's the reason why we have people in community development to work on these things so that we can do that. From the grant aspect of it, been about $5 million altogether that we've had, about 22, 23 grants, I think, altogether over the years. Environmental cleanup, parking structure, park development. Our partners in that have been Met Council, Minnesota D, Dakota County, EPA. I think I've mentioned everybody. We've had a lot of people that have provided help on that.
It's quite an alphabet soup, and I appreciate you elaborating on that. This is not unusual, and the public needs to know this. You read in the paper every day that, for example, the city of St. Paul buys a site and then starts fixing it up for development. This is not unusual, and it's not unusual for Hastings to do this either. The in-kind contributions that the city has made, you know, we have people like you in place to do these things. We have people like Rusty Fifield. Is he here tonight? I thought I saw him go. Oh, there he is, right in front of us. Our economic development director. We have staff people to do these things so that we can promote economic development. And it is, I think, beneficial, again, for the public to know this, so that we don't think that there's a developer that's bleeding the city dry. That is not the case in this situation, and not the case in any situations that I've seen where we've done some things for development. Where the art space building, we got that on track environmentally and everything so that they could do their apartment building. Very nice addition to the city. This will be a nice addition to the city too. The financing is not completed yet, right?
It is in process at this standpoint, correct?
Okay. But the developer is going to start doing some things on the project prior to the financing availability signed in ink?
Sure, and I'll begin to address this, and if someone from Confluence wants to assist me on this, feel free to as well. What Confluence has done is divided the project into two aspects of it. One, the building itself, two, the grounds. And they've created a separate entity for the park project so that they can move forward on that. And they have permission to do that, and we'll start construction on that tomorrow on that. Within the building itself, appraisal recently took place for the construction loan financing on that. I think the loan committee meets here very shortly on that. And from what I understand from talking to Confluence, they have a strong relationship with this bank over other things that they've done, and feel confident that they will be able to secure the financing on that. Confluence has also stated that if they are not able to, for some reason, secure the construction finances in a timely basis so that we can begin some of this work that's really timely from a grant standpoint, that they would seek permission to begin that construction prior to the construction loan.
And this is rather unusual. I'm bringing this up because this doesn't often happen. I mean, to the public, kind of equate this to saying, well, I got a piece of property here. I want to start building my house, but I don't have the financing yet, but I'm going to start building it anyway. You don't usually do that. And I think it is worthy to point out that Confluence is kind of, I don't want to say sticking their neck out, but they're so confident about what is going to be going on that this is an unusually happy arrangement that we have. And again, showing their commitment to what they want to do for us. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other, Councilmember Liefeld?
Thank you, Your Honor. John, I know you don't own a crystal ball or anything, so try to follow along with me and give me an answer, but if the city hadn't bought this building, what, 2010, did I see?
Yep.
$3 million. It was before my time on council. If we hadn't bought the building, what do we estimate would be going on right now? I mean, are we looking at a rundown building sitting on land? I mean, with weeds, what would have happened, I guess?
If I was to look into my crystal ball, council member, I would predict, if we were not involved in the project, The operation of Hudson changed substantially when the bridge came in. It took out their loading dock area. I don't believe they'd be in that building today. I think they would have taken operations out of town. So they would have been marketing a vacant, almost 200 square foot industrial building on the riverfront. There would not have been a private entity that would come forward to do any demolition or environmentals on it. So they'd be looking for any sort of income they could to rent it out for any sort of industrial or storage use on it. That's would be my prediction, is what would have occurred.
And as far as how it's zoned, that's a great answer, thank you. I'll have some personal items I'll need you to check into for me as well later. But as far as how it's zoned there, would there have been, because what I didn't ever want to see there was a large apartment building, something tall, something, could that have happened?
Previously, the property was owned industrial.
Okay.
And so it would have had to have been some sort of industrial use there. When we took over the property, we ended up rezoning the property so that it was more of a mixed-use downtown type of zoning.
Okay. So the reason I asked that question is just everyone's really been wondering, you know, everyone's curious. It's been a process, and it's a very big process because it's a very big project. But to understand that ultimately it was what was going to be best for the community, what was going to look best on the riverfront. You know, no offense to the Hudson building. In its day, it was probably a beautiful building sitting down on 2nd Street. It hasn't been that for 50 years. So I think as from a city standpoint, being able to say, this is the best case scenario. We're removing an industrial building, which was and has been an eyesore, to bring something that's going to just really be vital and vibrant in our communities. So I just really want people who are a little concerned and asking these questions to just really look back and think, what is this going to be and what will it do for our community compared to what it's been doing for the last 9-10 years? So thank you, John, for your crystal ball assessment.
No problem.
Thank you. Council, anyone else? Okay, Councilmember Vaughn.
Thank you, Your Honor. We just heard this at Hedra, so I just wanted, everybody's made good points. It's 2010, somebody else made this decision to say, let's continue on the historical side of this. I've heard progress, I heard process, we're getting there. It's been painful, a very good word. Someone said we're sticking with the historic side, that's what we want, so we're gonna stick with it. We've been really sticking with it. Councilmember Brock made a good point a couple weeks ago that, you know, TIF is a risk, and we chose to TIF this to ourselves at Hedra, and we're gonna take a risk. We risked. I think what I see now with this new agreement, I give our staff and I give our legal counsel working well with our partner that we tighten it up. What I really like is they kind of shorten the default. We got a 7-day thing versus 30 days. So we are reducing our risk on the public side for the people and the public that they need to know that I feel comfortable with what is in front of us today because it puts a little less risk on the city because I've heard from the public too saying enough is enough, stop the whole thing down there. We've had a lot of relationships that we built with this place privately and with on the public side with these grants. Those people too want to see this historic place finished. That's why we've been getting such great results with these grants, with this great grant writer that we have. So I think my only recommendation is to staff and to our partners in Confluence, you better help us as elected officials because we're getting a lot of questions. We need better communication. It's been very weak. I can only say so many times, so many years, oh, it's going to be great. It's coming. It's good. And I can see a sign went up around Rivertown Days. That's not enough. That's a start, but we need literally physical communication. We do it well with our streets when we're doing a street project. That's a great example. I think that what we need so we can educate our people, and I think we need to consistently educate the residents of this is where we're at. So, Your Honor, I'm willing to make a motion that we approve the signature of the third amendment to the purchase agreement as it's stated with Confluence Development and Hudson Manufacturing.
I'll second
Okay.
that.
All right, Councilmember Vaughn and Councilmember Balsonic. Any other discussion? No other discussion? All those in favor of this motion? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you all for your work again, and tomorrow morning, I guess, right?
Tomorrow morning is what I hear?
Okay.
All right.
We're gonna love to see that shovel on the ground. Thank you.
Just to clarify, we're surveying the bottom trees coming down on Tuesday.
Okay.
I want to
You're starting tomorrow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. Sure. Okay, the council will now take up the appeal of Summit Management from the prior decision of John Hinsman, Community Development Director, as an administrative official. For this appeal, the City Council is sitting as the Board of Adjustment, and appeals is provided in City Code 30.02. As the Board of Adjustment, the Council will act in a quasi-judicial capacity tasked with the duty to consider or decide on the appeal. The question for the council to decide is whether the decision of the administrative official should be affirmed or reversed. A motion to reverse the decision of the administrative official will require 6 votes to pass. A motion to affirm the decision of the administrative official will require 4 votes to pass. In deciding the appeal, the council is required to apply the facts contained in the application and other submissions against the language in the City Code 155.29, which describes the uses permit in the C2 zoning district. Because of the ordinance, language does not specifically address the proposed use. Motorcoach Commerce Facility as a permitted or prohibited use. The council will need to interpret and intend the language of the ordinance using its plain and ordinary meaning to decide if the uses proposed for the application are permitted uses. John Hinsman, as the administrative official, has determined they are not. The applicant believes they are permitted uses, and the reasons for that position are contained in the application and supporting letters in the packet. I will now turn the meeting over to John Hinsman, who will introduce the item and provide information supporting the staff determination. After the presentation, the applicant Summit Management will have an opportunity to address the council and present any additional information they would like considered as part of this appeal. Thereafter, the council will need to take action on this appeal. John?
Right, thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council members. What I'll do is provide some background information on the project or the proposal itself, and then go through some of the rationale and some of the conclusions that we made in determining that the use is not allowed within the C2 district. So what we're looking at right here are 2 parcels of property located on Highway 61 Vermillion Street near 25th Street, shown here. This is the former Super 8, the Value Stay, no, that's not, Asteria Inn. Here, these 2 parcels are vacant. They are between Highway 61 and the hotel. You can kind of see the driveways coming in right now that serve it. The property is on Vermillion Street, Zone C2. C2 is a commercial zoning district. The definition of C2 is it's a highway auto specialized commerce district. I'll get into that detail in a little bit later here. We were approached with an application on June 17th by Summit Management. Summit Management and Hastings Commons are the owner and manager respectively of this property, and they've been seeking development of it for quite some time here. They came forward with an application for site plan review, which was submitted to my office on June 17th to construct what they termed a Motorcoach Commerce Facility on the property. Now, the Motorcoach Commerce Facility generally consisted of 12 Motorcoach sites for transient customers and various on-site services for travel trailers and motor coaches. And so, along with that, they provided this sketch along with some other supporting details showing how the site could be developed. When you're looking at the site here, this is Highway 61, so north is to the left. This is the hotel site up here. This would be the creation of 12 pads here for motor coaches. And then over here, this 10 by 12 building would be for services related to what they term various on-site services for the travel trailer customers, which would include washes, detailing, sales of provision, water pump, lift station, et cetera. So those activities would be provided out of this 10 by 12-foot building that would be placed at this location on the property itself. So we really looked at this at two different things here. We've got what we term the primary use, or the use that takes up the majority of the property, which is what they're terming a Motorcoach commerce facility, the pad sites, and then this smaller area over here, which would provide some of the on-site provisions within the property itself. What the application did not do is define what transient customers are. We don't have an identification or any lengths of time for the Motorcoach users, how long they would be there, how the lease would work, that sort of thing. So that is something that was undetermined at this point. When we take a look at the C2 district as far as uses go, this is an excerpt of it here. It has an intent statement, which most districts have. The intent of this chapter in establishing the district is to provide appropriate areas for commercial establishments which are oriented to the motoring public or which require large sites for off-street parking or display of merchandise. So that's the general intent of the district. Within the district, you have identified uses permitted. These are uses that by right that someone can operate without any special permissions by council or planning commission. Those uses permitted include commercial establishments which are oriented to the motorist, including but not limited to eating places, automobile service stations, auto repair shops, car wash, and motel. Any one of these uses as a permitted use and can operate as a right. Along with that, accessory uses incidental to the principal, uses including but not limited to off-street parking. So accessory uses as well, along with those, would be uses permitted. Under C here, we have what we term special use permit or uses by special permit. These are items that require review by our planning commission and approval by our city council prior to operation. They include commercial establishments requiring large sites for off-street parking or for outdoor display and sales such as farm implement sale, auto and truck dealers, manufactured home sales, and building material sales. Open sales or rental lots are subject to site plan review requirements. Also, towers, a tower for like a cell tower or whatnot, would also be a use allowed by special use permit. So those are the defined uses within the district itself. When you take a look at something like a Motorcoach commerce facility, it's not specifically defined within the code itself. When we take a look at things that may be similar to it, that may be construed of a similar type of use, we did not make the conclusion that any of the uses, either by permitted uses or by special use, would meet that definition as well. And so we made the determination that the project, the request for site plan review, could not be heard by the city and rejected the application based upon the use being proposed, the Motorcoach commerce facility, and the associated parking pads for parking of trailers and motor coaches on the site were not consistent with the zoning code. So we rejected the application outright on that one and returned that to the applicant itself. Shortly after that, we had another request from the developer to consider the use. We brought the use forward to our planning committee of city council, chaired by Councilmember Vaughn and Balsonic and Leifeld serving on the committee as well. We asked them the question as to whether any accommodations, any changes should be made to the code to accommodate the use. There was a very brief discussion that occurred at that meeting, and it was the opinion of the planning committee that they did not want to do that. Now, again, the planning committee of council is a body that does not have any final review authority. They are purely an advisory board to give direction, and they don't have any final decision capacity within there. So we take a look at this use itself. We've come to a couple of conclusions in looking at it, and I'll go through those here. The proposed use consists of really two distinct uses that we see. We've got the lease of the parking pads, which are the majority of the development, which are the majority of the development. Those are the 12 travel trailer pads themselves. So we have that use, and then we have the provision for washing and waxing services and retail services, which would be done out of that 10 by 12 building. The parking pads would be the predominant use on site. This Commerce Center building, the Tough Shed building, is the less significant aspect of that site. The parking pad use is not expressly defined and permitted within the zoning code itself. We're looking at the plain and ordinary meaning that must be construed to determine if a use is permitted. We don't have anything similar to that, not specifically within the code, nor similar to that type of use that we feel would be allowed within that district. We determined that the parking pad rental uses are not permitted within the C2 district for a couple of different reasons. Number one, the unrestricted duration of the lease are not termed as oriented to the motoring public. They're more akin to a residential use. We don't have any information as to how long individuals may be habitating the structures in here. Without that restriction, this could be construed as being a residential use, which is not something that is included within the zoning district. The undefined duration distinguishes from eating places and motels, which are permitted itself. So we have those type of things within the district. The C2 permitted uses do not include parking of recreational vehicles and or equipment. We don't have anything specific for that. We do have specific RV equipment provisions and definitions elsewhere within the code. We have those defined primarily for parking purposes, in which we have a definition within the code that establishes what an RV is, and also has information stating that it is something that would be that habitating an RV in a permanent nature is something that is not permitted. The city code prohibits recreational vehicles equipment from being used for permanent residence, and there's no exemption of that for the C2 district. Camping areas, which is what we as staff think this most closely resembles, should not be defined narrowly and should include recreational campsites. Should not be defined narrowly and should include recreational vehicle campsites. Within the agricultural district, we have a provision to allow for recreational uses, campsites being part of that. There's a site plan review requirement as part of that. We feel that the use that is being presented here is more akin to that of a camping area than it would be most closely resembling that definition. And that use is allowed within the agricultural district and not within the C2 district itself. The services portion of the proposed uses, the vehicle washing, waxing, detail, and sales provision, that would be allowed. That would be separately permitted within the C2 district. However, those uses constitute only a small portion of the proposal itself. The larger aspect of it, the parking pad establishment, the undefined nature of those parking pads itself, we do not feel is in keeping with the C2 district and do not feel that there is reasonable grounds for us to determine that it would be allowed within the district. Lastly, the planning committee of the council, their consideration, we feel, has not unfairly prejudiced the hearing. The committee members themselves, they can distinguish their roles between that of committee and council members differently, and the planning committee is advisory in nature. They do not have independent decision-making authority. So we stand by our assertion that the proposal for Motorcoach Commerce Facility is something that is not allowed within the C2 zoning district, in particular those pad sites, the parking pad rental sites that they have established. And I can stand for any specific questions, or you may turn it over to the representatives of the applicant.
Thank you, John. Council?
Okay, thanks.
Good evening, Council. My name is Amanda Johnson, and I am the representative here tonight from Summit Management. And I wanted to give first a little bit of background about how we came to own the property. So we purchased the property back in 2004. Since then, we have attempted to find a use for the property, a user for the property. If you've driven by there, you've seen that we have, signs up. We also market it online. To date, we have not been able to find a user for the property, which brings us to 2017, as Mr. Hinsman mentioned in his application or his information to you. At that point in time, Mr. Lambert, Mark Lambert, sent a letter to council, essentially sort of inquiring about what options do we have at that time. After that, didn't really hear anything back. Fast forward to 2019, and this year we did sort of a deep dive on the ordinance itself, the C2 ordinance, to look and see what we could do under the ordinance. We also took a look at the surrounding area. And I actually brought maps that might be helpful. Just pass them. So if you look at the map is just a Google map that shows Vermillion Street and the various uses that are running along that property adjacent to the property that we own. And you'll see that they are all very auto-focused. There's the O'Reilly Parts, the Magic Touch Car Wash, there's the brake repair, the Hastings Car Wash, and there's also some motels that we noticed in the area. So we were sort of looking for something that we thought would fit in well with that. And what we came up with was this Motorcoach Commerce Facility. The idea is that it's essentially a motel for motor coaches. So it's for people who are looking for essentially a motel-like scenario, only they're staying in their motor coach versus staying in a bedroom that we supply. So as we started to look at that, we started to look at what sort of services we would need to provide for this transient, clientele. And we knew that they would need a dump station, a lift station, that they would need access to water services, air compressor, those kinds of things, and then also that they would want the detailing services. So we looked at how we could do that in a cost-effective way. At this point, we're sort of thinking that would be like an appointment style thing where they would book it online, just like they would be booking their place online, very similar to a motel. So it would be very similar to the how you would book a motel room. We would allow for some provisions, things like that in the small building that we're planning to put on site. The tough shed that was included in your packet, side note on that, is an example of what we're thinking. We fully understand that that building would need to be built to code, and we would need to work with the city in terms of what we wanted that building to look like. And then, of course, they would be parking their motorhomes or their motor coaches overnight in the spots, and that's where we got the 12 spots. It was not our intent, and it is not our intent, for this to be a recreational use. This is a very kind of economic use, very pointed to the sort of automotive transient group. And again, looking at the uses all along here, sort of fitting in. We're providing a service that isn't currently existing here, but we do think would mix well with the uses that are around us. I think that's kind of the background information that I wanted to give. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to our attorney. He can deal with the legal aspects, unless you have questions for me about the background.
All right, thank you. Council? Councilmember Leifeld?
Thank you, Your Honor. Amanda, I have a question, just because you corrected yourself when you started to say motorhome, motor coach. What's the difference?
Terminology. I'm somebody who calls them our motorhomes, but I think as looking for a little bit more luxury feel, motor coaches sounds like a more luxury term. So when we're thinking about the name, motor coach sounded fancier.
Thank you. I was just curious what the difference was.
Councilmember Brox?
So what duration of time would you anticipate a renter of a space using?
I can,
Yeah.
you want me to address
Sure.
it? I can address that.
Sure.
Madam Mayor, members of the council.
Thank you.
I'll let you sneak in.
Jacob Steen with Larkin Hoffman Attorneys, 8300 Norman Center Drive.
Welcome.
Thank you. So with respect to that question, and I can get to that in a little more detail, but at this point, we don't have a restriction in the same manner as there are no restrictions on hotel or motel stays. The city or Summit would absolutely be amenable to and open to discussion in terms of what that would look like in terms of a restriction on duration. But because there's no requirement in the code, we haven't identified what that restriction would look like. But again, we're absolutely happy to engage on that issue if that's really where this pivots.
No, that's fine. I just, that seemed like an unanswered question, so that's what I wanted to know.
Understood. Well, as staff has indicated, we are here appealing the city's administrative decision, and that decision very specifically, as we see it, is a narrow interpretation of what is otherwise a broadly permissive C2 district. And that C2 district, as staff indicated, allows commercial establishments which are oriented to the motorist, including, but not limited to, eating places, automobile service stations, auto repair shops, car wash, and motel. And it's important from a land use perspective to understand how that's constructed. And it is fairly unique in terms of a land use code, a zoning code. A lot of cities will, most cities will opt to define uses, identify a list of enumerated uses that are permitted as of right. But the city here, in a situation, has established a category of uses that fall under commercial uses, establishments oriented to the motorist. And then it proceeds to list a handful of examples. That list is not intended to be exhaustive, and it is not limited to those uses. Relying on the city's code, Summit proposed a use that falls squarely in that very broad and very permissive category of uses. In order to fall into that category, again, you need to meet two findings. One, it's a commercial establishment, and two, it's oriented to the motorist. A commercial establishment means it must simply just engage in commerce. Commerce is, of course, the exchange of money for goods, services, or accommodations. We have heard that we are clearly engaged in services, goods, and accommodations for money. So we meet the first requirement. The second requirement is that we are oriented to the motorist. Now, our target, as Amanda indicated, is high-end motor coaches. There is a large culture of people who travel the country in these luxury motor homes, and they look for facilities just like this to get their services, get cleaned up, get washed, stay for a couple nights, see the area, and move on. So to call the operator of a motor coach anything other than motorist would be disingenuous. So we squarely fall into that second finding. So it meets both requirements, but moreover, it is substantially similar to some of the examples of permitted uses that fall under this category that are listed. For example, a motel and this proposed use are consistent in that they both offer transient customers a short-term daily accommodation on a daily basis along with ancillary services. Car wash is also a specifically identified use, and as staff indicated, that's something that we do provide on site as well. So based on the city's ordinance language, which again is a broadly permissive language, this is an allowed use. But I also want to address a couple of the comments that were in the staff report and in the presentation. Initially in the staff report, there's the issue about whether or not this shed there's some question as to whether or not it would meet the building code. And I can unequivocally tell you, of course it would. This is a conceptual building. There will be an office center on site, and this would be the office building. Any building will, of course, go through the required city processes and by law meet building code. And if we need water and sewer, it would absolutely provide that. The staff report also notes that parking for transient customers is not a specifically identified use. But again, based on the way that the city has opted to design its zoning code, it has not listed specifically identified uses other than a handful of examples, but rather it establishes a much broader category of commercial establishments oriented towards the motorist. So we do fall into that, and it does not need to be specifically identified. The duration of the stay not being defined was also raised in the presentation. And again, we understand that that is a concern, and we are absolutely amenable to engaging in a conversation about what that would look like, what that would typically look like with a motel or a hotel. And as long as it's commercially reasonable, we'd be happy to engage in that conversation. Last comment, that it mostly resembles a camping area is also a challenge for us, because the camping area, similar to the uses enumerated in this chapter or in this zoning district, camping area is simply a type of recreational use example that's cited in the agricultural district. But a camping area is not a defined term, and the law does not allow staff to read into the code a definition where one does not exist. So using the plain and ordinary meaning of that language, we are not a camping area, we are not a recreational area. There are no tents, there are no bonfires. So these distinctions and this construction is really critical for us and for the city in the way that you interpret your code, because state law is very clear. And of course, the city absolutely has the authority and legislative discretion to regulate land use. But once you adopt that code and you put it into writing, the public is allowed to and expected to rely on that language. And the law requires that you give the plain and ordinary meaning to that language. But the law further requires that those interpretation must use a reading that is the least restrictive to the rights of the landowner to use the land as they wish. So the issue at question is this determination, and this determination does exactly the opposite of what the law requires. It took a very narrow interpretation to a very broadly permissive use provision, and frankly, it's unsupported by law. So for those reasons, we are here asking the council to reverse staff's decision and grant the appeal. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Council? Councilmember Vaughn?
Thank you. Jacob, you may not know this, Johnny might be able to help us, but when you bought that property in 2004, what was the zoning then? Was it what it is today?
I would have to defer to Mr. Hinsman.
Yeah. Councilman Bry, I believe it was C2 at that time as well.
Your Honor, that's my hang-up. I mean, the applicant bought the property at C2 back in 2004. They said they've tried to market it, can't find a solution. We have a zoning code that, in my opinion, fits. It actually lays out some directions of what could fit in there. They're saying they can't find a tenant that goes in there. So now they're trying to broaden it up, saying, I would rather find, your code's not defined enough, so we wanted this, but they won't put in the application. Councilor Box asked, how long? What's your definition of how long you want to bring it there? We don't know yet, is what we hear, but we're willing to talk about that. That's where I get hung up, because why didn't the application then say, this is what this is, it's not a campground, it's a transit place, we use hotel and motel as a reference, but it offers service, so they're like trying to find everything there, but they won't say. I heard him say, Jacob say a couple nights, and then it went to daily. That's a campground to me. We then are bringing something in, bringing it out, and that's why I don't think that law, the way you're reading it, is not how I read it. This is zoned for C2, but right now, until the applicant says, I want to use it for this long, and tell us what the property is, right now you're telling me it's a campground. That's how I read this, because it's daily or couple nights is what the words I heard. So that's my hang up on this one.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Vaughn. Councilmember Balsonic?
Thank you, Your Honor. And I have to just underscore what Councilmember Vaughn is saying. Initially, we heard that these spaces were going to be occupied by employees from the refinery area who were in for 6 months, 3 months, 4 months on special projects, didn't have any place to park, and so they were looking for something like that. Months, all right? And now I'm hearing, you know, daily, maybe 2 days, 3 days. That's awfully transient, and a very mishmash of, you know, what specifically it is going to be used for. So I have a hard time, you know, wrapping my thoughts around what you're trying to do before you say, this is what we're going to do. We are going to rent out to employees at the refinery, either up at Flint Hills or St. Paul Park, up at Chemalite, you know, places like that. Or are we going to market to, you know, mom and pop? And I know a lot of these, and Councilmember Brox, by the way, my Uncle Oliver always said RV or camper. Okay, an RV is self-propelled, and that a camper is either like a fifth wheel, you know, trailer type thing. And so that's what I'm looking at. I don't know, but in all seriousness, now that I'm bringing that up, I don't know if fifth wheelers or campers are going to be allowed in there too, you know, versus just the travel trailers, RVs, whatever you want to call them. I don't know who you're marketing to, and therefore I have a real problem with going along with you. But by the same token, I have complete confidence in our ordinance and zoning requirements. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Fulch?
Thank you, Your Honor. I understand the perspective of the business owner, to be very honest. My parents have a very large RV, and they spend all winter down in Texas. And they tell me about how they have lots of friends who come from Canada, and they travel all the way through the country. And I know my folks that, I mean, they like to beeline straight down to Texas, but it's still too far to go in a day. And so they'll go 8 hours and stop someplace and then continue going. And so I define camping as there's a fire pit and you get around and you're roasting marshmallows. And you're not doing that with these RV campers. I mean, they are hotel rooms, they are homes within themselves. And I know my folks, they like to do that kind of work, but they're not doing that when they stop along the way, when they're going down to Texas or Florida or wherever they're going. And so when I look at the other uses of the space around there, I don't see how it doesn't necessarily fit. It's right next to the mobile home community, and there are other kind of like businesses. There's a car wash next to it. We have the new used car dealership that's going to be going down a little bit further there across the street. And so I don't think that it sticks out so much that it wouldn't be an allowable use. And so I mean, I have to agree, you know, the Asteria, you know, sitting there, you look at the front of the building, and clearly there's that lot that's in front of it that, I mean, honestly, it looks a little odd because there's a fence in front of the hotel, and it's like, what the heck are they doing? I mean, it looks really bizarre. Let's just call it as it is. And so it's clear that that they want to use that property for something else. And so, you know, so I think that if the owner would be willing to, you know, meet the conditions of the city staff, where you are defining specifically how long a stay is, because, you know, like I just said, my parents, they go for 4 or 5 months, and they could stop someplace for a couple of weeks if they wanted. And so I think maybe that's more camping out, you know, where you're staying for a long time. But if it would be just, you know, a few days, maybe they're going to Treasure Island, you know, and they're just, you know, making their stop there. And so not to be disrespectful to the staff, because I have the highest opinion of John, But I do understand the landowner's perspective in this particular case, so I would be in favor of overturning that ruling, so thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Liefeld?
Thank you, Your Honor. I do have a question, and was it Jacob? Is that right? Okay.
That's
When I hear high-end motor coaches, I immediately notice Mr. Pat Reagan in the back of the room and think of the bus company. A motor coach to me is a bus. It's a way to, I've got a driver who takes me on a tour. So I Google it, because, we've got the Google, and I see a lot of different things. Well, I spent a week going camping across the Northwest states with my daughter in a tent, and I saw everything from a one-person tent to what I'm thinking you're defining as a high-end motor coach. And they were all in the same campground. Some took up more space, some of us didn't take up as much space. So I guess I'm concerned or questioning how you defined, if your market is a high-end motor coach, how do you define that and who patrols that? So let me add a second question to that as you're gonna answer it. So if I were to make a reservation online like I would my motel, for instance, are they going to be asking me what it is I'm driving? And would I be able to bring my 20-foot Winnebago? Where is that at?
Right, Madam Mayor, members of the council. At this point, we have some general guidelines that would be in place, but the intent would be to regulate generally the types of uses that would show up and that would be allowed to show up and make use of the property. The intent would be to identify, and we haven't gone through that full exercise of narrowing down because, of course, the products that come out are constantly changing, of narrowing down what that would look like, but we would seek to define that in guidelines and enforce those so that we do have self-maintained high standard of those vehicles using the property. And I don't know what that would look like in terms of distance or, length of the structure. Some of these, as you've probably noticed on Google, they cost as much as 2 or 3 single-family homes. And there is just a huge culture, as you mentioned, to folks traveling the country in these. So the goal would be to define that in the guidelines, and we do understand, and I believe we did submit some general guidelines, but we would be absolutely amenable to working with the city on helping to identify what that would look like within, with some reasonable boundaries.
Thank you, Jacob. And follow up, you indicated no tents and no bonfires. Again, that's something that'll be patrolled, because despite what Councilmember Fulch says, turns out that these people do enjoy a good bonfire with some s'mores. So, s'mores are something that are pretty great. So how is this going, what is your process for patrolling that? It sounds like this shed of whatever make isn't going to house an employee.
There will be, it'll be intermittently staffed, and there will be security, of course. So, and it will be the policy, and if tenants violate those policies, then there will, of course, not be invited back. So it will, but the intent is truly that it's not going to be a campground. It's not intended to be a campground. It's really intended to be a high-end opportunity that's, almost park-like.
Okay, I think Councilmember Lund here has a question, but I guess I'm trying to figure out, again, back to this 10 by 12 foot shed type thing, building, whatever it is you're gonna put. If it's going to be patrolled, how, by whom, where are they staying? Are they just driving in their car for 24 hours a day? I'm confused at the whole, how does it run? Even the state park has a little building where somebody works in it
Part of the part-time,
during the daytime
correct.
hours.
And that's the intent, is that there would be somebody available for a limited amount of time, and then it would largely be mobile bookings or online bookings for the specific services so that they can send that staff or that consultant out there. But there would be occasional staffing. In terms of the security, that would probably be somebody, contract security. There have been thoughts about whether or not we could engage and provide some additional services with the hotel adjacent, but those are all very early days in those discussions. I mean, ultimately, this is this is also a nice symbiotic relationship with the Asteria Inn's lane, or Asteria, I think it's Asteria Inn, there, the facility there, the hotel, because there are some services that guests may want to take advantage of. So again, this is early days in those discussions, but those are things that we're entirely open to. And frankly, to the comment about having not submitted that information is not required anywhere here, and it wasn't until we received a denial letter that those concerns, those questions were asked. So we'd be happy to, if there was a standard that existed, we'd be happy to engage in a conversation about what that looked like to make sure it's commercially viable. But and when I did say on a daily basis, I mean they pay on a daily basis. I think that most days would probably be more than a couple of days.
One final, I do want to state to Councilmember Vaughn, I feel, I agree with what you're saying in that I see this as falling into one of two categories. If this high-end motor coach costs 3 times 3 houses, that's a home. And if it doesn't, it's a camper. I'm seeing this as a camping feature. Great, it might be a high-end, wonderful way for affluent people to travel, but it's still camping as far as I'm concerned. So that's where I'm stuck on it, not meeting the criteria of a C2 commercial zoning district, as I'm seeing it. If it's a $500,000 motorhome, motor coach, it's a home. That's residential. And if it's not, if it's your little camper, to me it's a camper. So I'm going to have to say I don't feel it meets the criteria.
Councilmember Lund.
Thank you, Your Honor. John, I don't know if you can answer this, but hopefully you can. What zone is the Three Rivers and Hastings Terrace? And then you can stay up because I have a couple more.
Mayor, council member, this one's not on. Mayor, council member, the 2 mobile home parks that we have in town, the Hastings Terrace, which is adjacent to this property, is Zone C2, which is a similar zoning district to this property. That being said, the use of that mobile home park predates the establishment of our zoning code, so it's essentially grandfathered in. It would not be allowed to be, it would not be a permitted or special use permit today to operate that facility. The other one, the Three Rivers Park, that we have a specific R6 zoning district that we established, and that property is zoned that way.
Okay, so it's fair to say that if Hastings Terrace were to start from scratch today, they'd need to be in an R6.
Correct. It's fair to say that a mobile home park is not allowed within the C2 district.
Thank you.
The only reason that one exists is because it predates the code.
And then the follow-up to that, Your Honor, is then if a prospective business owner were to come to the city and say that I'd like to open up a campground, what zones would you be pointing them to?
Council member, I'd be pointing them to the agricultural district as a use that would be allowed within.
Okay, so as a conclusion to my questions, if you are looking to stay a long time in a mobile vehicle that's a home, you would have an R6 zone. If you were looking to stay for a short term in a mobile vehicle, it would be a zone, agricultural zone.
Right. When we take a look at the R6 district, that's intended to be a permanent habitation, someone's permanent home, a residence, an address that they would have. That would how we would differentiate it.
Councilmember Fulch, sorry.
Thank you, Ron. John, I had a question because the gentleman, the attorney here, he had stated that in law it doesn't define what a campground is. And so that's interesting to me. If we don't have a definition of law as to what a campground is, then it's arbitrary as to how it's being interpreted. And if we don't have anything that's definitive within our city ordinance that, so it states, here's the definition of a campground. I mean, how is it then that we're supposed to apply that concept?
Councilmember, Mr. Steen is correct that we do not have a specific definition within our zoning code for what a campground would be. That is correct. When we take a look at uses within the C2 district, as Mr. Steen pointed out, it's a pretty wide list with things being consistent with the motoring public, various types of uses that can fall within there. When we take a look at the proposal as it has been presented here, we have questions related to the length of stays within the different motor coaches that would be proposed for this property, and may that be construed to be habitation, a permanent residence. There's no limitation on that, and with that potential of stays occurring where they could be a permanent residence, we do not find that's consistent with the district.
And then just to follow up on that, so if it is truly a situation, again, the devil is in the detail, correct? Where if it is a higher end, I know because my father, he's retired and he's frugal, right? And he tells me that he likes to stop at those places, but they cost a lot. And so he'll only stay an evening and then keep on moving. Whereas if he can go to a state park, maybe he'll go for a couple of days, because it costs less as they're moving, because it's more economical to actually go to the RV park where they have a long-term lease, right? And so, I think that there's assumptions here that if it was a high-end RV stop for them to be able to rest, so truly, I don't have that personal experience. I only can live, vicariously through my parents and their travels and what they tell me, but it just sounds to me when I have those conversations with them that there is, this demand for a safe place to stay for the night or two and see the area and keep on moving, and it's not a campground. And because I define camping in my opinion is I'm off with my kids and we're dirty and we got bug spray and we got a fire ring and there's trails, and it's like that where it's being proposed, there wouldn't be any of that unless they're hiking over to Vermilion Falls. That's hardly roughing it. So anyhow, I'm not inclined to deny the use if further conversations can be had and assurances can be given to staff that it is a short term and dogs aren't allowed to run around and people can't put up fences or fire pits or anything like that when you think about when you're truly camping. If you're truly just going and you're servicing your vehicle and you're stopping for a night or two so that you can take in the area, heck, that might be good for tourism, and I know that our chamber president would probably be in favor of increasing tourism to the area. And so with that said, I'm opposed to denying the special permit. Thanks.
Councilmember Brox.
I know a lot of things have already been said, so I'll try to keep my comments brief, but I think maybe it's just my own personal lack of creativity and thinking about new business ideas that I just have a really hard time visioning this. The reason that we set a zoning code, the reason we have a zoning code, the whole purpose of it is because we're shaping the characteristics of a neighborhood or a city the way we want it to look. And we just went through a Vermilion corridor plan. We spent a lot of money on a study. We tried to come up with a way that we could think about how we're going to vision and shape the future of Vermilion Street. And when I think about those plans and then I hold this up against it, I just don't see how it matches. And I think that not only do I not see how it matches that plan, not that we're going to make everyone do that plan, but part of our job as the city council is we are trying to shape some of these districts to look and be the way that we see the city in the future. And so as I look and think about the city in the future, I don't see this fitting into our plans. And I understand that we may not have a defined list, but with all due respect, you cannot sleep in a car wash or a restaurant. You can sleep in a hotel, so maybe that's the closest analogy that you have here. But we are trying to shape this area to look and be a certain way, and I guess like I said, maybe it's my lack of creativity and being able to understand kind of how this would work or what it would look like. But for me, when I think about this area and the way that we're trying to shape the character and vision for the future, this use is very difficult for me to see. And I understand how you may want us to interpret it as a hotel, but I really am having a hard time seeing how that could be the case. And while I do want owners to utilize their property and get the full benefit out of their property that they can, I think the city, we do have a role in shaping the character of the area. And in this case, I just don't see myself, I would not support I would not overturn a denial. I would support the denial because I don't think it fits into what we're trying to do in this area in the future. And we are following the zoning so that we can shape the neighborhood so that it looks like what we want 20, 30, 40 years into the future.
Thank you. Okay. I will speak too because I do have a fifth wheel and we do travel. And I have seen all types of areas. I find it really hard without that being, having a building to accept people coming in or some sort of someone watching to see what's going on. I could actually even envision people just pulling in for the night. I do have a fifth wheel, but I do know that you do not have to have water hookups and you do not have to have sewer because they have holding areas. So you can pull in for a night rest and go. I get the whole thing. But when you say the coach, some people think they have a motor coach and they have a fifth wheel or a travel trailer. How can you decide what is going to be appropriately coming in? So I think, you know, we all have a little bit of knowledge that you could maybe bring back to us or with some more defined notes or rules, regulations. I know I sign a huge lease for our fifth wheel for a seasonal area. And I also agree with Councilmember Brox. We're really working hard on our 316 project. We want that to be a beautified visual coming in, and I just don't know if campers coming in and out and going is appropriate for our vision. So I have to agree with our staff that works diligently for us all the time. And so at this point, Dan, do you have anything else?
Mayor, I would just confirm that, you know, again, the decision tonight is pretty narrow to decide whether or not the decision of the administrative official, John Hintzman, should be affirmed or reversed. So there has been obviously a great discussion on the issues and some options that may come into the future, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands the decision tonight is narrowly limited to that purpose. I would also like to raise the applicants kind of took issue with the concept that this matter was referred to the planning committee of the council for the reasons that were stated in that staff memo. I think that's a potential challenge to process, so I at least wanted to bring it up. The Board of Adjustment rules say that once an appeal is made, then that stays any proceedings regarding the application until the Board of Adjustment or the City Council sitting as the Board of Adjustment makes a decision on the appeal. Procedurally, John and I have talked about that, and I think what's important there and what I would like the council to consider is that the committee, number one, is not a decision-making body, it's an advisory committee, and also that this body and the members who were on that committee and who are also on the city council here tonight, that they really separate their decision to be just what's in the record here today, not anything that they may have heard or thought related to that prior action. So at least we can support that you're making an independent decision tonight just based on the record before you. So again, a procedural question, but if this gets challenged, I think it's important that the council has at least considered that and distinguished any information that those council members might have received on another date from what they've received in this council packet. So I just want to point that out. Other than that, the voting requirements come from the ordinance, so a reversal would require 6 votes. If there's a motion to affirm the decision of the administrative official, that would require 4 votes. So we just got to be careful on that and then see how the voting goes.
Thank you. Council, any other discussion? Could I have a motion, please? Councilmember Liefeld?
And watch my wording here. I'd make a motion to uphold the administrative official's decision that has been placed before us.
If I could, Your Honor. I think we need a written decision to come out of this, so if you could direct staff to adopt a resolution consistent with the findings from tonight.
You lost me.
You've made a motion to uphold the administrative official's decision. That has to be supported by a written decision by the council. So generally, when you make that motion, you would be directing staff to develop a resolution that is consistent with your findings on why this decision is being made.
Councilmember Brox?
Motion to approve the administrative decision on the zoning of this property by John Hinsman, supported by the findings of fact, consistent with the discussion of the council.
Second? Councilmember Balsonic? All those? Okay, any other discussion?
And so we are, I'm sorry, Your Honor. What must the vote be?
On this motion, 4 votes.
4 votes in favor. In favor, all right. Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Got it. I will seek a motion to move into a closed-door session pursuit of Minnesota State Statute Section 13D.05 subdivision for preliminary consideration by the council of allegations or charges against an individual subject to its authority. I seek a motion. Councilmember Brox and Councilmember Foltz. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Shut everything down and